It's Ken Harbaugh with the MeidasTouch Network. There was so much in Trump's State of the Union address that deserves our scorn. But it was this moment that may well go down in history as the flashing red warning light of an impending constitutional crisis.
So despite the disappointing ruling, these powerful, country-saving, it's saving our country, the kind of money we're taking in, peace-protecting. Many of the wars I settled was because of the threat of tariffs. I wouldn't have been able to settle them without. Will remain in place under fully approved and tested alternative legal statutes. And they have been tested for a long time. They're a little more complex, but they're actually probably better, leading to a solution that will be even stronger than before. Congressional action will not be necessary. It's already time tested and approved.
Donald Trump has zero respect for the separation of powers, which means he has zero regard for the Constitution itself. When the Supreme Court struck down his tariffs as unconstitutional, Trump immediately condemned the justices voting in the majority and set about finding ways to circumvent their ruling. And here you have the clearest visual representation of that confrontation. A solitary potentate staring down, literally looking down on the Supreme Court justices who tried to check his power. We have approached many Rubicons already. In Trump's second term, he has tried and continues to try to politicize the military, to weaponize the judiciary. The list goes on. But the ultimate Rubicon will be when he openly and brazenly defies a ruling by the Supreme Court. That is coming, and it will be a full-blown constitutional crisis. I attended a meeting last week of the Bolt's Judicial Institute, a gathering of jurists and legal scholars who spent some time wrestling with this very question. I had the honor of interviewing recently retired federal judge Paul Grimm, who has rededicated himself in retirement to educating Americans about just how important it is to maintain and uphold the independence of the judiciary. My full interview with Judge Grimm is on my Substack page. That link is below. Here's an excerpt where we talk about the attempts by the Trump administration to undermine judicial independence and about the judiciary's need to maintain the public trust, because ultimately, without its own army or the power of the purse, that trust is the court's only real source of power. Here's our conversation. Maybe the only thing more threatening to that system of checks and balances than the attempt by the other branches to politicize the courts is the growing sense that the courts actually have no teeth. When you look at the fact that Reuters just reported that there are over 4,400 illegal detentions by ICE and no significant attempt to remedy that, 89 violations of court orders. On one hand, that is an absolute indictment of the executive branch and its disregard for not just constitutional norms, but the law. But it is an even greater indictment of the fundamental weakness of the judicial branch. How do you reckon with the removal of the veil that, as Jackson said, let them enforce it? You have no army.
Well, there's no question the Federalist Papers that Hamilton said that the judiciary was the weakest branch. It had neither the power of the purse or the sword. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to imagine that, or the difficult thing to imagine that if a court says, no, you can't do it this way, that violates the Constitution or a statute, that there's going to be pushback. Mm-hmm. There has always been pushback, and there have always been instances in which there may be lip service paid to complying with a court order that wasn't really followed up with, or there have been a grumbling or attacks, or even during the Jeffersonian his tenure as president, that they tried for political reasons to impeach Justice Chase because they disagreed with his rulings in favor of the Federalist agenda. He was impeached, and it took the courage of 6 Jeffersonian senators to say, no, we're not going to vote for impeachment here because that would be wrong. There has been a tradition and there have been norms that you had to comply with court orders. And yet at the time when there can be slow walking compliance or a absolute disregard, the only way that the system itself has for dealing with that is to go through the system itself with contempt proceedings. And the hope is that oftentimes what you hear people say is that, well, if it's a lower trial court, then, on appeal, it may be set aside. But what folks need to understand, which is why court orders should be followed and complied with, is that the system has a self-protecting environment to it. When a trial court makes a ruling, there are appellate courts, and there's ultimately the Supreme Court. We have, thus far, not seen an example of the Supreme Court conclusively ruling on the merits of a case and saying, this is the ruling, where there has been a disregard about it. And I think that you have to build from that hope that what you need to do is you need to let sometimes the system absorb some of the hits and to keep going till you get to the point where you have that final judgment. It's probably the most fragile aspect of our democracy and the most fragile arm of the separation of powers. And we just have to have faith that ultimately, even if there is an instance where someone flatly disregards a final order by, for example, the Supreme Court, that the public itself will come to see the danger of that happening.
Let's talk about that, because that is why ultimately we're here. The ultimate check of executive power, and to a lesser degree Article 1 power, is the public, while we remain a democracy. But a public that doesn't understand the value of the courts or the role it plays cannot offer that kind of support.
What we have to do is we have to turn to folks who can explain the message about why courts are important. And that's something that retired judges can do because they understand the way the system works and they can participate in programs to say, well, why shouldn't you just be able to impeach a judge? Or if you don't like it, well, why not? Why not do that? And explain why it's important that not happen.
It's Ken with a quick break to tell you about my Substack page, where you'll find bonus episodes and other exclusive content. And subscribing is a way to support this show directly without us having to rely on advertisers. For those of you who have signed up, thank you so much. It is growing harder and harder to rely on traditional media. Just look at what has happened over at CBS. So independent news is going to have to make up the gap. And if you believe in what we're trying to do here in the interviews and the commentary that this show brings you, please consider pitching in. It's free to sign up, and that itself is helpful because popular shows get recommended to even more people. And if you're able to afford a paid subscription, they start at $8 a month. Every dollar goes back into what we're doing. Thanks for helping out.
But ordinary people talking about how, they were about to lose their house. And a court heard their case and prevented the foreclosure from occurring because it wasn't done in accordance with the law. About someone who was not getting their child support, and they almost lost their children because they could not take care of it. About a person who was injured and went to court and got a recovery that could help them to recover. The stories about how courts have actually made a difference in the lives of ordinary folks, it's not a story we've told well. It's a story that we need to tell better, because when folks can understand what is at stake for them. So, for example, judicial independence. We hear judicial independence and we think it means we're right to be impartial so that we rule without fear or favor. But when many people in the public hear judicial independence, they hear that judge thinks that they can do whatever they want. They're independent. They're not bound by any rules. Completely opposite impact that this public perception has than what the theory is supposed to account for. But to unpack it in a way to say, well, let's assume that you have done something and you are accused of something that you are defending against, or you are in a dispute with a powerful, well-financed opponent, and you go to court. Do you want the judge who is going to rule according to the facts and the law in favor of you if the law and the facts support it? Or do you want the judge to say, well, I'm worried about who might be offended by that, so I'm going to go with the power. Why should I rock the boat?
I'm going to give you the opportunity to offend some powerful people. I hope you take it as you have the rare distinction of having been an esteemed judge, the leader of a judicial institute, and a JAG, a military lawyer. How worried should we be that the current Secretary of Defense's first action was to dismiss the JAGs, the consciences of the military who would advise those combatant commanders when they're about to do something illegal? It seems like you do something like that when you're preparing to order your military to do something illegal.
So I will say this: I like you. I had the privilege of serving in the uniformed services as an Army JAG. Unlike you, the most dangerous job I ever had was commuting the Beltway to the Pentagon. But what I will say is this: I yield to no one in my respect for the ordinary men and women of the armed forces of this country in terms of their sense of duty and obligation, and the sacrifices that they have made, particularly your generation and the current generation now. Mine was a cakewalk compared to what you all had to deal with. And what I worry about for them is that if you're a sergeant, a platoon sergeant, or you're a company commander, and you're in a situation, I think the one that we worry about the most, which is when American troops might be in American cities because they have been ordered to be there. What happens if an order is given? And the answer is if that order is declared to be a legal order, then to disregard a legal order puts them in jeopardy of being court-martialed. And so the judge advocates, the JAG Corps, has always had the most important duty of giving fair advice that is legally sound to the commander on difficult situations. And the hope that we can have, and it's a challenge too, because if you are a person who has spent your entire career to become, to get elevated to the rank of colonel or general, and an order comes down and you turn to your JAG and say, can I do that? And the JAG says, no. Now, a good JAG, and I learned that as a captain in the Pentagon when I was giving advice to generals, is if you say no, then, there's an old expression that something rolls downhill and a captain is far downhill from a general. But if you said, no, we can't do it that way, but your objective can be achieved with these parameters, and so let's talk about how we can do that without having to cross that line, then my hope is that the JAGs, the company commanders, the field grade officers, and even high up will give good faith advice, because he didn't get rid of the JAGs. He just took the career JAGs who were there, said, thank you very much for your service, and put new folks in. There may be a time when we will find out whether or not the legal advice given by the military JAGs is faithful to what their mission has always been. The hope I have is that the advice will be legitimate advice, and that the military, which views its job as supporting and defending the American people, will not find itself in a place where they feel that, regardless of whether a lawyer says it was legal or not, that they have to make a choice of conscience. But the men and women who serve in our military are remarkable, and we ask things of them that very few other people are asked to do. And I sometimes, my prayer at night is that we can be worthy of the sacrifice of the men and women who have made that in the service of our country.
Indeed. Thanks, Judge.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.